Hello. In this video, we're going to be covering rhetorical synthesis. So, this kind of question is fairly straightforward when you look at it, because these are the three tips you really need to focus on. First of all, you need to read the question carefully. Then, after that, you look at the answer choices based on the question and look at the text if necessary. Now, why I say if necessary is because sometimes you might not need to look through the text at all. If it if you can see the questions and only one of them answers the question specifically, then you probably have the right answer. But sometimes you want to double check the text because some sometimes the SAT examiners might trick you and give you false answers in one of the answers. They might give you something false. So you want to make sure you avoid that and but still keep that in mind. Keep in mind that what you select could be false. If there's anything conflicting, then look at the text. Otherwise, you might not necessarily have to prioritize it. So let's look at this practice problem, for instance. While researching a topic, the student has taken the following notes. The Philadelphia and Lancaster Turnpike was a road built between 1972 and 1974. It was the first private turnpike in the United States. It connected the city of Philadelphia and Lancaster in the state of Pennsylvania. It was 62 miles long. The student wants to emphasize the distance covered by the Philadelphia and Lancaster Turnpike. Which choice most effectively uses the relevant information from the notes to accomplish this goal? Alright, so emphasizing the distance. B doesn't say anything about the distance, so we can rule that out. C doesn't talk about the distance at all, and neither does D. A is the only one over here that talks about the distance and actually emphasizes by putting it in the very beginning, the 62-mile long. All right, now based on that, I want you to try this practice problem number two. All right, let's look at this carefully. The student wants to describe how fabric is used in the assertion of will. Which choice, how is the fabric used? In assertion of will, the figure's clothing is made of fabric pieces stitched to the painting's canvas. Okay, that gives us exactly how the fabric pieces are used in the assertion of will. I don't think we need to look through the other options, but just to be sure, we can do so. The exhibition Oracles of the Pink Universe is featured by the artist, but this doesn't really focus about the piece. Depicting three standing clothed figures, assertion of will is a painting. It doesn't, it doesn't talk about how fabric is used. And Simfiwe Nzube's assertion of will, again, this one doesn't mention the fabric at all. A is the only one that really focuses on it. It answers the question most directly. All right, now try this one on your own. Okay, let's look at the question here. The student wants to explain an advantage of the ICAA's archive being digital. Which choice most effectively uses relevant information from the text to accomplish the goal? So, explaining an advantage. So, A over 10,000 documents. This one does is certainly impressive, but it doesn't really explain the advantage or any benefit from this. Like they've given us a statistic, but they don't expand on this. So this one is out of the question. C. Among the historical documents are the writings of Latin American and Latino artists and critics. This isn't really a benefit here. It's not an advantage here of the ICAA's archive being digital. It's and letter D is also incorrect because again, it doesn't focus on any advantage here. B is the only one that does this because they're talking about the archive being digital and saying by offering online versions of the historical documents, It provides more access to the materials without removing them from the countries of origin. So, again, a lot of emphasis is placed on the question itself. While okay, let's look at this. The student wants to present the study to an audience already familiar with environmental DNA. Which choice most effectively uses relevant information from the text to accomplish this goal? So, looking at this carefully, already familiar with environmental DNA. So, C is out of the question immediately because we don't really need to expand on what eDNA is if the audience is already familiar with it. So, we want to present the study to an audience already familiar with it. So, D is also out of the question, and B is also out of the question. A is the one that talks about this one the best because they're presenting the study to the audience, and B doesn't really present the study at all. It only talks about analysis, and while it does assume that the audience is familiar with it, it doesn't present the study. Now, this one over here. Pause and try to figure this one out. Now, the House of Wisdom. The student wants to explain how the House of Wisdom preserved the world's knowledge. So, let's see this one carefully. The student wants to explain how the House of Wisdom preserved it. So A doesn't really explain anything because it tells us what it was known for, but not how it preserved the knowledge. Founded in Iraq in the 8th century, the House of Wisdom employed many scholars as translators. Again, it doesn't preserve the knowledge. It doesn't talk about how the knowledge is preserved. Writings from the Greek philosopher Aristotle and the Indian mathematician Aryabhata were preserved at the House of Wisdom. Again, it does focus on what knowledge is preserved, but it doesn't explain how it is preserved. That's only accomplished by option D. Now, let's look at practice problem number C. Number 6. We're going to do this one together, so pause this one and try figuring this one out. All right, let's look at this one carefully. The student wants to provide an explanation and an example of Oliveira's Sodic meditations. So, explanation and an example. So we can see here that B doesn't really fit the description because it's not providing an example. Walk so silently that the bottom of your feet becomes ear is an example. This one doesn't really provide an explanation here. And let us, A is going to be the best option here. Because over here, we're given an explanation of how sonic meditation isn't music, but a series of sound-based meditations that consist of instructions. And then they give us an example through meditation 18, because it instructs participants to listen to a sound until you no longer recognize it. I hope this helped you with any questions you had or concerns you had about rhetorical synthesis. I appreciate you tuning in for this one, and thank you for watching.